Bert Folsom is here, the Hillsdale College Distinguished Fellow, best-selling writer and historian. Bert, first off on that and the fact that Hassett would sign up to at least being an advisor, an economic advisor to the campaign. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that it suggests that President Trump may actually run again for president. It's too early to tell, but he certainly had a successful presidency on the economic side in that his corporate tax cut from 35 to 21% did stimulate a lot of entrepreneurship and economic development. And we had a lot of people go off food stamps. We had a lot of jobs that were created. So in many ways, it was a successful presidency.
You know, we're a year in almost to the Biden presidency. His poll numbers look pretty bad. In fact, his approval level at an all-time low. Now, you've always reminded me that oftentimes where a president stands going into his second year doesn't necessarily jive with where he'll be a few years later. But what do you make of where he is now?
Well, that's a good point. President Clinton started at the end of 2 years, lost 50 some seats in the midterm elections, House seats. He was doing very poorly. He had a tax hike and he had a failed health care plan, but then he reversed course. He began cutting taxes and he had the welfare reform that took a lot of people off welfare, and we had budget surpluses. And so the poor start ended in a strong finish. It looks like the reverse is happening here. We have a poor start by President Biden. And of course, people are hitting him for poor leadership. But the economic policies that he's put in place are not likely to succeed. They're not likely to make people's lives better. The oil prices are high. The inflation is persistent. And those kinds of policies, he's not making any effort to curtail very much. So I suspect that we will have continued problems for President Biden as he proceeds in his presidency.
Do you think he'll face a party challenge?
I think it's likely that he will on the left. Remember, President Carter was in this position. He started, he had problems with the oil. Again, just like President Biden, he had a foreign policy problem with Iran, just as Biden has with Afghanistan. And Carter finished with very high inflation. And he had a challenge from Ted Kennedy in his party when he ran for re-election in 1980. Yes, I would expect Biden to have a challenger from probably, though, from the left, if he were to run for re-election.
Normally, when a president faces an inter-party challenge, he survives that, but he doesn't survive the general election. I'm thinking of Gerald Ford trying to fend off Ronald Reagan in 1976,
yes.
Or as you said, in 1980 with Carter trying to deal with Ted Kennedy. It can be problematic, can't it? They might get by and hold on to the nomination, yes, but be damaged goods in the general election, right?
Very much so. In fact, you might include George Bush, the first, with the problem he had from Pat Buchanan in the primary. So, yes, when you receive because it's hard to unify the party, and when the party's not unified, it gives momentum to the other party, and it gives other voters to the other party who you think should be voting for you.
Do you think that, given tomorrow's the one-year anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, does that revisit all these old issues for Donald Trump, or his loyal base is such that certainly within the Republican Party, it's not as much as an issue as it could be in a general election should he run?
That's a good question. I think we need to know more about January 6th. There's so much footage that has not been released. We still don't have data on how many FBI agents were involved in stirring up the crowds. These are important questions to answer. I think we need a full picture on January 6th. We do not yet have that full picture.
All right, but if we have proof that the president at the time was just watching this on TV and was doing very little to halt it, slow it, deal with it, how does that play out?
Right. That I agree could be a problem. Presidents often have difficulty in how to react when something is going on and you don't know how the crisis is, when it's a one-day sort of crisis, how it's likely to end. And I agree that part very well might go negative for President Trump. But I think there's so much that needs to be known, and then that needs to be discussed, that until the widespread knowledge of January 6th is forthcoming, I don't think that we will be able to assess how it's likely to impact the next election.
Very well said. Bert, very good seeing you again. Bert Folsom, historian extraordinaire, an uncanny read of history and how it does repeat itself, not oftentimes in the way you think. So don't get too caught up on where we are in the moment.